everyone, and welcome back to the Neuromatch Conference. My name is Chris Rozell from the Georgia Institute of Technology, and I am just thrilled to be here today for a panel discussion on neuroscience as visual art. I think what you'll see here is we have a fantastic panel of visual artists, some trained as scientists, as neuroscientists, and some not, but all who use neuroscience as their inspiration for their visual art, and all who are going to share their thoughts with us today about this intersection of the arts and science and what each side can feed into the other. So I just want to kind of go around the room and tell you who we have, and they'll get a chance to tell you in a few minutes a little bit more about what they do and their art and how they connect it to neuroscience. So panelists, if you could just wave when I say your name so people know who we have here. We have Kathleen Childress. Hi, Kathleen. We have Michelle Banks. Kathleen Sluka. Christine Liu. Laura Jade. And then a virtual part of our virtual panel, Greg Dunn, is unable to be with us live on the panel today, but has some information that he sent us in a video that we'll play a little bit later. So for now, I'm going to turn things over to Kathleen Sluka, who is on the faculty at the University of Iowa and an artist as well in her spare time, who's going to give us some introductory thoughts that the panel worked on putting together before they dive into their individual work. Kathleen?
And you can see the screen, right?
I am not getting screen share right now, so. Oh, and Kathleen, I just lost your audio. Kathleen, no audio from you right now.
Kathleen, can you hear us? Oh, okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So yeah, in my spare time, I do art, and I do neuroscience related art. I'm going to give you a brief overview.
Kathleen, I don't have slides from you right now. Are you?
Oh, sorry. I was wondering if there we go. You got them now?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. Sorry about that. So anyways, this panel kind of looked through these slides. We had some help putting them together to try and make them look nice. And we just want to give you a really short overview of the intersection of art and science. And that'll be followed by a short presentation of our artists. And hopefully, if time permits, a question and answer session. So you may think that artists and scientists are polar opposites, but they are very similar in many ways. We tend to think that scientists are very logical and data-driven, and artists are very emotional and creative. However, both scientists and artists use creativity to explore the world and communicate that to the public. I love this study, and as a scientist, I had to put in one study. So this is a brain imaging study that examines creative centers in artists and scientists. And as you can see, the artists and scientists, while they're both creative, use different brain centers. The scientist is activating mostly the prefrontal cortex, with the artist activating the limbic system. So Leonardo da Vinci is the classic science artist, and he was an amazing artist, best known for the Mona Lisa and the Last Supper, but he was also an inventor and an anatomist, and his work is shown in art museums as well as science museums. But we're all familiar with Ramón y Cajal. He is probably the most famous neuroscientist that we know, and he's really the father of modern neuroscience. But little known is that he started out with an interest in arts and his humanities, and his father said, no, you should go to medicine. So he turned to medicine, but he combined these areas, and his career mapped the neural structures throughout the brain. And these are just beautiful images of some of his work. From this work, he developed the neuron doctrine, which every neuroscientist should know. And it states that neurons are individual cells that send and receive information. This is the basis of modern neuroscience today. And he won the Nobel Prize in 1906 for this work. So now we're going to fast forward to the 20th century. And in the 20th century, there was a very famous lecture by a guy named C.P. Snow. He's a scientist and a novelist. And he talked about the breakdown of communication between the two cultures, meaning the arts and humanities and science. And he suggested that this breakdown was a hindrance to solving all of the world's problems. And that led to the STEAM movement, or the STEM movement, sorry, got ahead of myself, to improve science and math and technology instruction in the last half of the 20th century. The STEM movement improved scientific literacy, and it really led to increases in girls and women in the sciences as well. More recently, John Maeda, who is a graphic designer and a computer scientist, he focuses on humanizing technology. He's really been promoting the STEAM movement, which really puts art into STEM. And he says that science alone will not lead to the breathtaking innovations of the 21st century demands. He believes that art and design are poised to transform our economy in the 21st century like science and technology did in the last century. Come on. Okay, so, oops, skipped a slide. I've gone crazy. All right, so what's in it for the scientists, and why should a scientist actually care about integrating art into their science? Well, at this point, there's really only been qualitative studies, but these studies tend to show that integration of arts and science enhances creativity and innovation. It improves communication skills to the scientists, particularly in the context of the non-scientists, because all scientists want people to understand their science. And it reminds scientists to keep track of the bigger picture of the topic they're studying. Okay. One example of a science artist that has really done this is David Goodsell. And David is a professor of computational biology at Scripps Institute. His research develops methods for predicting and analyzing biomolecular concepts and applying these to drug discovery and design. Yet, as part of his time as a faculty member, and I'm really jealous of this, he spends time doing art. And he uses a unique type of illustration to really show portions of living cells that are magnified so you can see the individual molecules, and you can see some lovely pictures here that he's done. He refers to this as molecular art. And he has used this work to contribute education materials to things like the Protein Data Bank, where he does a molecule of the month in a community outreach page. And I'm just going to quickly tell you about this, and there's no time to summarize it, but this is the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine noted the importance of this topic, and they actually published a consensus report on this topic in 2013. The initiative was led by former president of my university, David Skorton, who was then the head of the Smithsonian, and he's a brilliant physician scientist. But this is a great document, and I just encourage you to go to their website, download it. You can read it for free, and you can have it and get some really cool information on the subject. The last little topic we're going to talk briefly about is combining the arts and humanities with science and education. And either direction, whether you put science into humanities or art into science, studies have shown that it leads to positive learning outcomes, increased critical and higher order thinking, and it provides new perspectives and tools. They've also put arts and humanities into medicine, which really has increased empathy and teamwork among medical students and increased their tolerance for ambiguity, which is important in medicine. And last slide is really to highlight the Society for Neuroscience Art of Neuroscience exhibit that they've had for many years. And Kathleen and Greg were both inaugural artists at that exhibit and have been there every year since. And you're lucky to have them here. We also have many of these other people here have regularly presented there. And then we've added Laura Jade to our presentation today as well. So I'm going to go ahead and let the artists introduce themselves. And the first one I have is Greg Dunn. Do you want to do Greg's first?
I will. Yeah, let's have his video. So Greg found out at the last minute he wasn't going to be able to join us, but he was kind enough to prepare a short video talking about a little bit of his work and his thoughts about this intersection. So it's just a couple minutes long. Let me screen share it and we'll play from there. Kathleen, can you confirm that you can see the black screen of the video?
I do see it.
Okay, here we go.
Hi, everybody. I'm Greg Dunn, and thank you for having me. All right, enough chit chat. Let's get going because we have no time at all. I wanted to show you this slide to help illustrate what I'm going to talk about in terms of the connections of art and science. I think their most fundamental connection lies within humans' instinct to want to convey our experiences to other people, to communicate with others. Where it goes from there, we have some divergences and some similarities, but that fundamental root is common to both art and science. Now, in this image in the upper left-hand corner, you see here, it's a photorealistic oil painting, incredibly. And I will contend that this is a science experiment and not an artistic one. And I encourage you to not hear any kind of judgment or valence to that statement. I'm not saying it's better or worse in any way at all. What I'm saying is that if you were to give 100 very skilled artists this same image to paint, that the results of their experiments would be identical. So science is describing our external reality, whereas art is more of a look within. So in this painting in the upper right-hand corner, this abstract canvas by Gerhard Richter, let's say then you take those same 100 artists and you tell them, please paint frustration for me. You're going to get totally different answers for that question. We all share some thread of what frustration feels like, right? We can kind of talk about it amongst one another, but exactly what it looks like in our internal experience is the process by which we're trying to communicate that to other people. That's what the art of this is. We're bringing our subjective reality and making it manifest for others to be able to appreciate. And this image at the bottom, I think, is a combination of those two ideas, a description of both external and internal reality. Perspective and the reflectivity and the color, but he can then bring his own idea of this imaginary space into his painting so that we can go someplace that we wouldn't have been able to go before. So this is basically an ordinary example, I would say, of a practice of art and science here. So with our scientific tools, we can only penetrate so far into the nature of reality. But where the artists can really come in and help to expand our set is to help us to step beyond where we are in terms of our technological capabilities. And particularly as that connects with neuroscience is what I'm kind of interested in. And I want to show you the piece that I've made, which I think best illustrates that point. This is a work of art called Self-Reflected. This, I believe, remains, after 5 years, the most complicated artistic depiction of the human brain in the world. It's a sagittal slice of the brain depicting the activity of 500,000 neurons at once.
Hey, Chris, I think the video is muted, maybe because you're muted.
In conclusion, I wanted to talk about this real quick. So this is kind of a guideline that I use to help guide my artistic process. Where if you're making science art, particularly neuroscience art, the scientific content obviously has to be rock solid. It's got to be there. The aesthetics and style, particularly if you can make something a little bit different than others have seen, is a good place to be as well, to kind of carve out your niche, to see what exists out there and to consciously work against those tendencies, to try to come up with new visualizations that help people to experience the brain differently. And as I mentioned a few times now, having that emotional engagement is incredibly important. And at the intersection of all these things is where we have these aha moments, these moments that change people in the long term. Self-Reflective's goal is to change the way in which the average person thinks about the brain. So this is the template that I use for that. I'm definitely not successful all the time, or maybe even any of the time, but that's what I strive for. Thank you very much for your time, and take care.
All right, fantastic. I'm so appreciative of Greg doing that. I'm sorry for the audio there. I was getting a message that there was some feedback, so I tried to mute myself, but I thought the screen share would keep coming through. So sorry, I cut out the audio for a few seconds there. All right, that's fantastic. So beautiful. Kathleen, do you want to take screen share back here?
Yeah. Well, actually, next up I have is Michelle Banks from Artologica. And so, Michelle, I think you have your own slides you wanted to share.
Michelle, you're on mute.
You're on mute.
Okay.
So you want to share some slides different than this, right?
There we go.
Oh, you got it. Excellent.
Yeah. So, hey, I'm Michelle Banks. I am a fine artist based in Washington, D.C. And as mentioned, I've shown at SFN several times. I'm not a scientist. I mean, I just consider myself an artist inspired by science. So I'll just talk a little bit about, you know, what we're saying here about the intersection of art and science, and a little bit about my work. I think sometimes when we talk about the intersection of art and science, we have that mental picture of two roads crossing, and a little bit like the C.P. Snow idea of, you know, two schools of thought. And yet I think that so many people are doing so many interesting things that it's more useful to think about it more like that intersection as being a Venn diagram, where you have some people who are really doing things that are intended as science communication or as, like, you know, textbook illustration, and that is also art. And then I'm a little bit more at the other end of the spectrum, where I'm doing art, you know, that I want to stand on its own as art and be evaluated as art. And yet, you know, it draws a lot from the ideas of neuroscience. So, I mean, I think art that engages with science doesn't need to advance the goals of science. It's okay for it to just be art. And that said, art and science can definitely enhance each other. I think that seeing art about science, you know, for the viewer, it can spark a desire to know more. And so it can lead people into, you know, into the science. And conversely, it can create that emotional response that can be stronger than the intellectual response that you maybe get from, you know, reading a paper or an article or looking at data. And I've sometimes said, I mean, people, you know, one of the areas of visual science, let's say, is data visualization. And I don't put myself there, but I like to say that some of my work is data visceralization. It's getting you in your gut. So I'll just give you an example from somebody else's work. Oopsie, why is my so here, you know, this is a picture of an HIV virus. And if you look at the bottom right, there's this famous picture by Therese Frere, which is also essentially a picture of the HIV virus. It's just, you know, this is the two ends of the spectrum. You're seeing the human and the emotional side versus the scientific side, and both of those are important. So when I started out, I was painting images of dividing cells, basically because I thought that that it just amazed me that this kind of simple activity is all of life is springing from that. So I was doing that for a while, and somebody sent me some images of the Brainbow's work from Lichtman and Sains, and I was like, oh my God, this is so amazing. Because not only was it so beautiful, but the fact that it wasn't sort of like, they weren't coloring those images. I mean, they were actually like creating the color in the cell itself, was an astonishing idea to me. Besides the aesthetic appeal of brain cells, it's also really fascinating to me that you're creating some art that's about the thing that you're creating it with. So you have, you know, all of your brain is in charge of essentially all of perception and emotion and cognition. And who wouldn't want to make art about that? I mean, that's just really good stuff. So like I said, I started painting brain cells in watercolor. I like watercolor because you have two key things about it. One is that it's transparent, so you can show things that are going on beneath the surface, which is really key for a lot of science-involved work. And the other thing is that it naturally creates fractal patterns, which is very much like neurons. So it kind of, both of those things allow me to use the material in a way that kind of reinforces the subject matter. So from the brain cells, I started getting into a little bit more of a metaphorical place with the brains, where I was creating like all these images about how we feel about our brains and how they're working, like things that are branching or flowering, or you have the images of the lotus where you have people who are, you know, maybe meditating, and that can actually change the brain. You have ocean waves and trees and stuff like that. So that was something that I was doing for a while. And then I started getting into ink on Yupo, and Yupo is it's a paper that's made of polypropylene. So it's completely unabsorbent. So it's kind of the opposite of watercolor in a way. It doesn't absorb at all. So the ink just rolls around kind of on top of it, and it creates these amazing patterns. So one of the things that really appeals to me about this is that after using it for a while, I discovered that I could put on the ink and it would form these amazing patterns. And then I could wash it off, and it would only wash off like 2/3 of it, say, and it would leave these little ghosts or traces of what was there before. And I immediately thought that this is so perfect for portraying what's going on in the brain as you're getting information in, and it settles for a while, and then it kind of, you know, like it washes away essentially. You know, you're losing a lot of the information that you take in, and then you can put new information on top of that, and the ghosts of the old information are still there. So I just really like this technique for kind of bringing in that idea of what our brains are doing when we learn, when we forget. So yeah, since the pandemic started, I've been doing a little bit other kinds of work. I wanted to use the imagery of neurons and blood vessels actually as a motif to show this kind of the push and pull of separation, isolation, and togetherness. Like I feel like communities are kind of drawing together in a lot of ways, and even though they're physically separated. So I'm again going back to a little bit of a more metaphorical thing about using the neurons or brains, or sorry, blood vessels to kind of, you know, make that connection in the brain. Anyway, that's it. I'm happy to take questions later if we have time.
Great. Thank you so much, Michelle. That's lovely. A lot of appreciation for the uniqueness and beauty of each piece in in the chat coming up. Kathleen,
you
do you
so
want
much.
to screen share this?
Yep, I'm
slides
coming
again?
back.
Thanks.
All right, so that's Michelle. So Kathleen Childress.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. So Michelle, that was so poetic. That's hard to follow. That was fantastic. So my journey to becoming a, I guess my dog is barking. I can't believe it. Sorry. My journey starts with loving art and always doing art, and also having a love of creativity and writing. And I applied that, and I also love science. However, I pursued a career in the corporate world, and I was a writer for several years in the corporate world. I became kind of obsessed with jewelry, gemstones, and my sister is a neuroscientist. So she asked me to design something for her that was very meaningful. I don't know if folks have heard of Anna Rose Childress, but that's my sister. She asked me to design something for her. I designed this silver, if you see this cuff in the middle of the screen, it is a silver cuff with a stylized dopamine neuron on it. She studies opioids and addiction and cocaine addiction, has for 30 years. That's her passion. So I designed this cuff for her, and once it was created and worn, all kinds of folks in the neuroscience world, male and female alike, were like, oh my gosh, we haven't seen anything like this for scientists. Speaking of the intersection of art and science, folks said, we love the beauty of neurons and brain cells and all the structures, but we really haven't been able to wear that or convey that as a story of our passion and our careers. So the Synapse collection, if you will, was born. That was in 2011 is when we started this. And she was aware of Greg Dunn. And so we kind of lobbied with the Society for Neuroscience. Could we have an exhibit about art of neuroscience? And so that was the first year. I think it was 2012 or 13. These are some examples of the work on the left there under Synapse is what we call the bold and beautiful neuron. You know, it's a beautiful, like over 3.5 inch pendant in silver. It's almost like a signature or a talisman or an amulet for your science. And it also helps share the story of science. Whenever anyone wears this, people come up and say, that's beautiful, but I don't know exactly what it is. Can you please tell me? It enables both my sister or me or whoever's wearing it to share the story in a simple way about what a neuron is and how basically it is the core to everything that you're doing and saying in life. Interestingly, people would at different shows ask for their specific cells and neurons. So in the lower left there, you see my interpretation of microglia. They would come and say, where are glia, where are astrocytes, where are oligodendrocytes? So what I would do is go and research these cells because I find it totally fascinating to research what the cell does and then try to distill it into an essence and then express that in basically fine metals, precious gemstones. So those are my microglia earrings. This ring that's in the center there, that's along with the cuff is, we call it the transmitter ring because it's like a stylized neuron stretched out. It's also called the dancing neuron. There in the upper left, and this is one of the examples of how you can tell the story of science through a beautiful design. And I don't know if you probably can't see it too well here. But the ring there, I call synapto ring. And it is basically a very modern looking ring, but it is also a close-up interpretation of the synapse with pre and post vesicles, but expressed in rubies and sapphires there in the ring. So that one also gives you an ability to talk to people about what is a synapse and what does it do, and hopefully inspire some folks that may never have thought about these things to go into science. One of my sister's colleagues, in fact, said the first time she saw a picture of a neuron and learned what it was, that turned her entire life around. And she then applied to graduate school to become a neuroscientist. It's that simple. And she became, you know, a 20-year career neuroscientist. So interestingly, on the lower right is my interpretation of a basket cell. So basket cells synapse in the brain, they're beautiful, they're branching, and they synapse onto Purkinjes. I also have a Purkinje, but I won't show it here. So this is just the interpretation of that branching with the dendrites top and bottom, and it has an opal for the soma or the body of the basket cell. There are things here like there are more literal interpretations of brain slices. So this money clip in the upper right is a coronal brain slice with a golden nucleus accumbens. And so this was a custom commission for somebody who that's all they do is brain imaging, coronal slices, an MD, PhD, and it's a money clip. And so he carries it with him all the time. It's his good luck money clip, right? So it's just amazing how you can express the beauty of science in these beautiful enduring metals. These things will live on, they won't degenerate, as they say. So, and one more thing, and the center here is what I call a convergence pendant. So this is an example of taking the different elements of neurons and action potential there in gold on the left, and the fractal pattern, which is in a variscite, a natural gemstone, and just kind of bringing it all together in a really unusual interpretation. Clearly not a true scientific conveyance, but still beautiful, and still, again, and allowing you to talk about the beauty of neuroscience. So that's kind of, yeah, how I came to it. I was in a corporate world, really, then I became obsessed with jewelry. I became a gemologist as well. So I brought all these pieces, I guess, right brain, left brain together, and still doing it and still enjoying it. And we'll be happy to answer any questions as well.
That's a fantastic story. Thank you, Kathleen.
Mm-hmm.
I want to be aware of the time here since we have.
I know we're probably taking a long time. Yes.
We are.
So
Quick though.
Go, Christine.
Go, Christine.
Will you tell us a little bit about your story and your work?
Yes, I would love to. So I'm currently finishing up, hopefully what will be the last year of my PhD at UC Berkeley. And I use my art in all sorts of ways, including my research, just to communicate what I do. And then also to communicate more general concepts about science. I love how Greg and Michelle had put it in terms of just being able to leverage our creativity and bring different concepts together. So here was a computer science activity book that I was able to make, and I decided to depict the nodes of a neural network as pieces of pepperoni to kind of engage people on how to learn about this stuff. But most importantly for me, art is a form of self-expression, especially when I spend so much time in lab. As you can see, the little brain in the upper left corner is a very typical experiment for me, where I'll inject virus into 4 different areas in the brain and then implant 2 different fibers and then do a jugular vein catheter and then run the animals weeks later. So I spend a lot of time being very technical and diligent in the lab. So on those days, I like to go home and express myself with a lot of maybe fluid and chaotic kind of forms of art, but I also love to find ways to communicate things. So one of the newest pieces that I've designed is a Bayes locket. So it's the Bayesian theorem with one term on the outside of it and the equivalent term on the inside of it. And, you know, it's just kind of like a fun little token, a point where I get to be clever and share it with people. And I wasn't going to share my screen, but I'm just going to share one thing because Michelle had brought it up on how art and science is really much more like a Venn diagram than, you know, 2 parallel lines converging at one intersection and never meeting again. I think a lot of artists are scientists and a lot of scientists are artists. And I really think that the people who spoke before me are, you know, great examples of that. And with that, I'll pass it on to the next speaker.
Thank you so much, Christine. And I noticed the Bayes rule locket before you said anything. So you had my heart before you even got started.
Perfect.
All right. Kathleen, let's get your screen share back.
Got it. All right. So I'll be rather quick so we get enough time for Laura. So my story started out way back when I was a student, much like in high school, much like Cajal. My parents said, no, you should not be an artist. You need to do something you can make some money at. And they were probably right. And so I went off and became a physical therapist. Then I went to graduate school for anatomy and neurosciences and eventually started a faculty position at the University of Iowa. And I spent years and years just getting my lab up and running, getting tenure, getting my grants funded, doing all the things that scientists do, and raising my children. And at some point I said, oh yeah, I like that art stuff. And I started painting again. It took me a few years before I realized my real passion has always been science. So why not incorporate that into the paintings? So I'm only showing you two things. You can go to my website and look for more. You can see my Purkinje cells behind me that I did many years ago. And it's one of the first things I did after moving into science art. The first one I did is that I'm going to show you is Mondrian neurons. And my whole purpose on this one was really to combine art and science together, right? So Pierre Mondrian, this is his style, these kind of shapes and bright primary colors, but he never put anything into them. And as I was sitting there putting this together, I said, these can fit really cool neurons. And there's so many different types of neurons in the body and in the brain that I can fit them into these shapes. So, you know, I try to make mine as scientifically accurate as possible because I'm a scientist and you put that into your work to convey a message, but you can see Purkinje cells and pyramidal cells. There's lots of fun, different types of cells, but all of these are cells that have been intracellularly filled in some scientific paper that I looked up and found them and tried to put them in here. The other one I'm showing you is speed demons. Is what I named it, and it's really oligodendrocytes, and it's really meant to portray the role of oligodendrocytes in myelin, producing myelin and promoting action potentials, right? And one of the key aspects that oligodendrocytes do is that they actually provide myelin to multiple cell types, and they kind of clamp onto those axons like little feet and hold them tight and wrap around them. And so, you know, my whole goal with this was to portray oligodendrocytes in a way that isn't illustrative, but more art and more formative. And so I will often, in my teaching at the university, I will often take art and instead of putting up, this is my diagram of what a nociceptor is, I will actually put up a beautiful painting of a nociceptor or maybe Greg's painting of the spinal cord that he flashed through briefly and go through the science using art. And I think that the students learn that much better when you put them up there than going through these little diagrams that we use all the time. So I've been trying to integrate that more and more into art. And I, like Christine, feel this is a wonderful stress relieving outlet. And when I don't get to do it enough, I get a little antsy, and my lab knows, and they tell me to go home and go do something else. The other great benefit is every student in my lab gets an original piece of art when they leave. So that's another thing I always find really fun to just share it with other people. I know I don't make a lot of money in art, and I don't expect I ever would, and my parents were right, but I make enough money with my science to be able to support this wonderful hobby that I love doing. So that's kind of my story, and I'm going to leave it to Laura so that she can tell you hers.
Thank you, Kathleen. Yes, Laura Jade, would you tell us about who you are and your work and the intersection of science and art?
Cool. Yeah, hi everyone. So my name's Laura. I'm really enjoying listening to all your work. It's been really fun. Thanks for having me. So my background is I started in art and then went back and studied biology and then did my master's in lighting design. So I've had this sort of like wiggly career so far through lots of disciplines. And I want to show you my work, Brain Light, which is visualized here, which is kind of the synthesis of all my interests coming together in one work. So what it is it's a light sculpture that uses an MRI scan of a brain to create a sort of 1.5 meter physical structure of a brain made out of laser cut perspex. And it lights up in response to your brain activity. So the audience wears an EEG headset, and the work is illuminated in 3 different colors based on the electrical activity of their brain. So you can see here some of the colors. Green represents theta waves. So when you're sort of in a resting state, not thinking too hard, the brain will be green. When it goes blue, you'll be in an alpha state, which is sort of calm and meditative and relaxed. And then when it's in red, you're having beta brain waves, which are the fastest brain frequencies. And it'll be red to show the sort of energetic activity of your brain. So I was interested in taking a biofeedback technique that's used in, the clinic into art gallery settings to allow audiences to actually come and see what's inside their mind, to give them kind of access to what's going on and have a conversation with their own brain. So it actually invites the audience to become embodied inside the artwork, and then everybody else can kind of see what's happening within. So they become a bit of a spectacle. It's a bit of a performance, but it's also highly intimate because I end up working with the audience in a very active way. So I will ask them questions, I will give them emotional cues, and we can actually see the live change in their brain when they're responding to particular questions. So if they're embarrassed, if they're, shy, it'll show up in the artwork. And so I created this in 2015. And so in the last 5 years, it's had a bit of a life to it. I've also created a mini brain artwork, which is the size of a real human brain. And that's been commissioned by neuroscientists in Romania. And I've also taken it to labs in Israel for scientists to actually communicate neuroscience to their students. And I also teach neuroscience classes to kids as well. And it's a fantastic way to really engage children into neuroscientific ideas, is just plugging them into this and getting them to actually witness their own brain live. So that's a little bit about the artwork. Happy to answer any questions. I know we have 3 minutes left, so thanks.
Thank you, Laura. That's fantastic. It's beautiful. So as people are typing their questions into chat, if they have any, I'll just say, one of the things that I see is I've always seen art, and my background is in performing art, not visual art, but I've always seen art as being an attempt to express things that we don't quite have language for. And I think in a lot of ways, science is the same. We're trying to describe things that are at the frontier, and we don't quite have the language for it yet. And I love the way that all of you are kind of bringing those things together and giving us as scientists a way to kind of communicate the excitement of discovery. We've been talking in science communication panels all week about how that's challenging sometimes, that there's not a direct application to basic science. And I love that the kind of wonder that scientists feel about discovery can be kind of conveyed through all of y'all's work. So that's fantastic. Does anyone, after hearing all the other panelists, have any kind of comments or anything that they want to chime in with? Just as some closing thoughts, we have about 2 minutes left before we'll have to shut the room down.
Laura, you have to come to an SFN meeting and exhibit your brain light.
I would love to do that. Absolutely. Just say when. I'll try and get it over.
Post pandemic, I think.
Yeah.
When we can do this in person.
Agree. It would be a fantastic. Exhibit.
You said it's 1.5 meters tall, Laura?
Yeah, it's 1.5 meters wide, the big one, and it weighs over 100 kilos. So it's a little.
Oh
chunky.
my gosh.
But I do have the mini brain that packs into a suitcase. I can jump on a plane with that. I've done it many times. The airport people are always like, "What's in your suitcase?" That's so weird.
I can imagine.
Me too, on the way to SFN.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice. Well, with that then, before our room goes away here, I'll just say I am so grateful for all of your time and for hearing the stories of how you got into this intersection of artists, trying to communicate with and about science and neuroscience specifically. I think it's so valuable. It opens up ways to talk about our work, to open up ethical conversations, to do all sorts of things that are just so valuable. So with that, I just want to thank you all for your time. I saw that there's some discussion in the chat about some sales going on this week in lieu of SFN, being in person. So I'd also encourage you to check out each of the artists' websites and see if you can get a little bit of your science to take home with you as well. So thank you everyone for your time. What a lovely discussion.
Thank
Thank
you,
you so
Chris.
much for having
Thanks,
us.
everybody.
Nice.
Yes.
Thank you, Chris,
We
for
really appreciate
organizing.
it.
This was a pleasure.
Yes, we may
Take
have
care,
to do
everyone.
this at Neuroscience sometime.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
All right.
Great
thank
idea.
you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.